The first rays of the morning sun stretched across the dusty valley as Eli Blackhawk stepped onto the wooden porch of his modest cabin. A respected Apache hunter and widowed father, Eli had learned long ago that life rarely followed the plans people made. 5 years had passed since illness claimed his wife, leaving him to raise their 8-year-old daughter, Lila, alone. Every sunrise reminded him of his promise to his late wife, that their daughter would grow up knowing kindness, courage, and compassion, no matter how harsh the frontier became. Their cabin stood near the edge of a narrow river, surrounded by towering pines and rocky hills. It wasn't a place of riches, but it was home. Eli hunted deer, trapped rabbits, gathered herbs, and traded furs in the nearest settlement. Lila helped tend their small vegetable garden and cared for the chickens. Together they had built a quiet life, one filled with hard work but also laughter around the evening fire. One chilly morning, while filling buckets at the river, Eli noticed someone he had never seen before. A lone orc woman knelt near the opposite bank, struggling to lift 2 heavy wooden pails filled with water. Her faded green skin looked pale with exhaustion, and her once fine traveling cloak had been patched so many times that it barely held together. Long dark hair hid much of her face, but even from a distance Eli could see the weariness in her eyes. She wasn't old, perhaps only in her early 30s, yet she moved like someone carrying years of invisible burdens. Without thinking twice, Eli crossed the shallow river. "Those buckets are heavier than they look," he said with a friendly smile. "Mind if I help?" The woman immediately stepped back. "I don't need charity," she answered quietly. Eli nodded respectfully. "I wasn't offering charity. Just another pair of hands." After a long moment of hesitation, she finally allowed him to carry the buckets to a tiny cabin hidden among the trees. Calling it a cabin was generous. The roof sagged, several walls leaned dangerously, and smoke escaped through cracks instead of the chimney. "Thank you," she whispered before quickly closing the door. That might have been the end of it. But the next morning, Eli noticed she was gathering firewood alone. The following day she struggled to repair a broken fence. Another morning she searched the forest for edible berries. Each day she worked until sunset, always alone. Lila noticed it too. "Papa," she asked one evening while stirring rabbit stew over the fire, "why does that lady always look so sad?" Eli looked toward the distant cabin. "Sometimes people carry pain they don't speak about. Can we help her?" He smiled gently. "I think we can." The next morning Eli quietly left a basket outside her door containing fresh bread, smoked venison, dried herbs, and a small jar of honey. He knocked once before walking away. Later that afternoon he passed by and saw the empty basket sitting neatly on the porch. No note. No words. But someone had carefully polished the basket before returning it. The silent thank you made Eli smile. Over the following weeks, helping became part of his daily routine. If he cut extra firewood, he stacked half beside her cabin. If he repaired his own fence, he fixed a loose board on hers. When he harvested vegetables, a few always found their way into another basket left quietly at her doorstep. The orc woman never asked for anything. She accepted each kindness with quiet dignity, never expecting more than what was freely given. Soon whispers began spreading through the nearby settlement. "That Apache keeps helping the strange orc woman. Nobody even knows where she came from. She's hiding something." Some warned Eli to stay away. Others claimed she would bring trouble. Eli ignored every rumor. He judged people by their actions, not by gossip. Yet one evening, as he returned home carrying a bundle of firewood, an uneasy feeling settled over him. High on a rocky ridge overlooking both cabins, several distant figures stood perfectly still. Their armor reflected the setting sun for only a moment before they disappeared behind the hills. They hadn't been hunting. They had been watching. And somehow, Eli knew their arrival meant that both his peaceful life, and the mysterious orc woman's secret, were about to change forever. The days turned into weeks, and what had begun as a simple act of kindness slowly became a quiet routine. Every morning, Eli Blackhawk finished feeding the chickens and checking the traps before walking past the little cabin near the river. He never knocked unless there was a reason. Sometimes he simply left a bundle of freshly cut firewood beside the porch. Other days, it was a basket of vegetables from his garden, a piece of smoked venison, or herbs he knew could ease aching muscles. The orc woman never asked for help. Yet she never refused it anymore. One crisp autumn morning, Eli found her standing outside, trying to lift a heavy log onto a chopping block. Before she could protest, he picked it up with ease. "I can manage," she said, folding her arms. "I know you can," Eli replied with a small grin. "But it'll be finished before we finish arguing." For the first time, the corners of her mouth lifted into a faint smile. "My name is Graina," she said quietly. "Eli." Their introductions were simple, but they marked the beginning of something important. Lila was even quicker to break through Graina's careful walls. The little girl often wandered over with wildflowers, fresh bread, or simply endless questions. "Have you ever seen snow taller than a horse? Do orcs really sing around giant campfires? Can you teach me how to braid my hair like yours?" At first Graina answered cautiously, but Lila's cheerful innocence slowly melted the loneliness she had carried for years. One afternoon, Eli returned from hunting to find laughter echoing through the trees. Lila sat on a tree stump while Graina carefully braided her long black hair into intricate patterns. "It's beautiful!" Lila exclaimed, spinning around proudly. Graina laughed softly. "You'll need patience to keep it neat." Eli smiled from a distance. It had been a long time since he'd heard laughter coming from that lonely cabin. As autumn deepened, the work around the homestead grew harder. Storm winds damaged Graina's roof one night, tearing away several wooden shingles. Before sunrise the next morning, Eli arrived carrying spare lumber and tools. "You really don't have to keep doing this," Graina said. "I know," Eli answered while climbing onto the roof. "I'm doing it because neighbors help neighbors." She looked down, unable to find the right words. No one had called her a neighbor in years. By sunset, the roof was stronger than before. That evening Graina surprised Eli by bringing over a pot of thick vegetable stew. "It's not much," she admitted. "It smells better than my cooking," Eli joked. The three of them shared dinner beneath the stars while Lila told funny stories about chasing chickens through the garden. For a few precious hours, the worries of the world seemed far away. But peace rarely lasted long on the frontier. A few days later, three rough-looking bandits rode toward Graina's cabin after spotting her alone. "We hear you've been getting regular deliveries," one sneered. "Maybe it's time you shared." Graina stepped in front of her door, gripping an old wood axe. "I have nothing worth stealing." The men laughed and dismounted. Before they could take another step, Eli appeared from the tree line with his hunting bow already drawn. "You've wandered onto the wrong property," he said calmly. The leader smirked. "One man against three." Eli didn't answer. His arrow flew past the bandit's shoulder, striking a tree with deadly precision. The message was clear. The three thieves exchanged uneasy glances before climbing back onto their horses. "This isn't over," the leader growled. "It is today," Eli replied. The riders disappeared into the hills. Graina lowered the axe, her hands trembling. "You didn't have to risk yourself. I wasn't about to let anyone threaten my friends." She looked at him in stunned silence. Friends. The word felt unfamiliar, and comforting. Neither of them noticed the lone rider watching from a distant ridge through a brass spyglass. He quietly turned his horse and rode away. By nightfall, a sealed message was already on its way to powerful leaders far beyond the mountains, carrying only one sentence. "We have found Lady Graina. She is alive, and she is living with a human Apache." Winter arrived early, covering the valley in a blanket of snow. The river slowed beneath thin sheets of ice, and the mountain winds howled through the pine trees. Eli Blackhawk spent each day chopping extra firewood and checking on Grayna's cabin to make sure it could withstand the freezing nights. One afternoon, while repairing a loose window shutter, Eli noticed water dripping through a crack in the roof. He climbed into the small attic to patch it from the inside. The attic held little more than a few blankets, an old travel chest, and a worn leather satchel tucked beneath a beam. As Eli moved a broken board, the satchel slipped and fell to the floor. "I'm sorry," he called. "I didn't mean to disturb your things." When he bent to pick it up, something slid out onto the wooden planks. It was a heavy silver medallion unlike anything he had ever seen. The symbol engraved on it showed a fierce wolf surrounded by crossed axes, all enclosed within an intricate circle of ancient runes. Though tarnished with age, the craftsmanship was extraordinary. It clearly belonged to someone important. Before Eli could examine it further, Grayna hurried into the attic. Her face turned pale. "Please," she said softly, taking the medallion into her hands. "Don't ask about this." Eli nodded immediately. "If it's your secret, I'll respect it." She looked at him with surprise. "You're not curious?" "Of course I am," he admitted. "But trust means waiting until someone is ready to speak." For a long moment, Grayna stood silently, staring at the old medallion. Finally, she let out a slow breath. "I think you've earned the truth." They sat beside the small fireplace downstairs while snow fell outside the windows. Grayna turned the medallion over in her hands. "I wasn't born poor," she began. "This belonged to my father." She held it toward Eli. "It is the crest of Clan Ironfang, the strongest orc clan beyond the northern mountains." Eli frowned slightly. "I've heard stories about them." "Most of those stories are true," Grayna replied with a sad smile. "Some are even worse." She explained that her father had been one of the greatest war chiefs in the Orc kingdoms. Their clan ruled vast forests, mines rich with iron, and powerful fortresses guarded by thousands of warriors. After her father's death, several rival war chiefs fought for influence. They expected Grayna to marry one of them, turning her into a symbol of political power instead of allowing her to choose her own life. "I refused," she whispered. "What happened?" "They called me selfish. Weak. Ungrateful." She looked into the fire. "When I still refused, they stopped asking." Eli remained silent, sensing the pain behind her words. "They decided my choice didn't matter anymore. So I left." She fled under the cover of darkness with only a horse, a few supplies, and the medallion hidden beneath her cloak. She traveled for months until she reached lands where no one knew her name. "I traded everything I owned just to survive." She looked around the tiny cabin. "This life may seem poor, but every decision I've made here has been my own." Eli understood. She had not escaped poverty. She had escaped a prison built from power. "I won't tell anyone," he said firmly. "I know." For the first time since they had met, Grayna reached across the table and gently squeezed his hand. "Thank you, not for the food or the roof." She smiled warmly. "Thank you for seeing me as Grayna instead of whatever title I once carried." Before Eli could reply, Lila burst through the front door carrying a snow-covered rabbit she'd rescued from one of the traps. Both adults laughed as the frightened animal wriggled free and hopped across the cabin. For a little while, the heavy conversation faded into simple happiness. But many miles away, inside a towering stone fortress beyond the northern mountains, a messenger knelt before a circle of armored war chiefs. He placed a detailed map on the table. "We have confirmed her location," he announced. One of the chiefs studied the map before slowly standing. "Prepare 50 riders." Another tightened his steel gauntlets. "And bring the royal bodyguards." The oldest chief closed the map with a grim expression. "It is time to bring Lady Grayna home." 3 days after Grayna revealed the truth about her past, the valley felt strangely quiet. Even the birds seemed to have disappeared. Eli Blackhawk noticed the silence as he repaired a fence near the garden. His instincts, sharpened by years of hunting and protecting his family, told him something was wrong. Across the yard, Lila was feeding the chickens while Graina swept the snow from the front steps of her cabin. Then the sound came. Hoofbeats. Not one horse. Not two. Dozens. The steady thunder echoed through the valley, growing louder with every passing second. Eli set down his hammer and looked toward the narrow mountain pass. A line of riders emerged through the swirling snow, their armor glinting beneath the pale winter sun. There were far too many to be travelers. At the front rode 6 massive orcs wearing black steel armor trimmed with silver fur. Behind them marched nearly 40 elite bodyguards carrying long spears and round shields decorated with the same wolf-an axe's crest Eli had seen on Graina's medallion. The riders surrounded the clearing with perfect discipline. Not a single weapon was raised, but their presence alone was overwhelming. Lila hurried behind her father, clutching his coat. "Papa." "It's all right," Eli said calmly, though his heart pounded. "Stay close." Graina stepped onto the porch. The moment she saw the banners, all color drained from her face. "They found me," she whispered. The lead rider dismounted slowly. He was older than the others, with streaks of gray in his braided hair and countless scars across his broad face. His heavy cloak bore the markings of a great war chief. For a long moment, no one spoke. Eli stood firmly between the strangers and his family. "If you've come looking for trouble," he said evenly, "you'll have to go through me first." Several bodyguards shifted their grips on their spears. The old war chief raised one hand, signaling them to remain still. He studied Eli with calm, thoughtful eyes. "So," he said, "you are the human who has cared for Lady Graina." Eli frowned. "I've cared for my neighbor." The chief's stern expression softened ever so slightly. Without warning, he removed his helmet. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he dropped to one knee. Every bodyguard behind him did the same. The valley fell silent. "Lady Graina," the chief said respectfully, bowing his head, "we have searched every kingdom, forest, and mountain for you. The clans believed you were dead." Lila gasped. Eli looked at Graina, who stood frozen with tears welling in her eyes. You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "We had to," another war chief replied, stepping forward. "Your people have waited for years." The eldest chief rose slowly and turned toward Eli. "When our scouts first reported that a human was sheltering you, we feared the worst." He paused before giving Eli a respectful nod. "Instead, they told us of a father who shared his food, repaired your home, and asked for nothing in return." One by one, the bodyguards lowered their weapons completely. "You have protected someone precious to our people," the chief continued. "For that, Clan Iron Fang owes you a debt that cannot be measured in gold." Eli looked from the kneeling warriors to Graina. "I never knew she was a lady," he said quietly. "You treated her with kindness without needing to know," the chief answered. "That is why you have earned our respect." Graina stepped down from the porch, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I left because I wanted to live freely," she said. "I couldn't become a prize in someone else's struggle for power." The chiefs exchanged solemn glances. "The kingdom has changed," the eldest replied. "The rival warlords are gone. The clans are united, but without you, they have no rightful leader." He extended a gloved hand. "Lady Graina, we have not come to command you. We have come to ask you to return home." Eli remained silent as Graina stared at the outstretched hand. She had dreamed of freedom for years. Now, for the first time, she faced a choice between the life she had built, and the people who still called her their future. The valley remained silent long after the war chiefs finished speaking. Snow drifted gently through the cold air as Graina stood between two worlds. Behind her was the small cabin where she had rebuilt her life from nothing. In front of her stood the leaders of Clan Iron Fang, waiting patiently for an answer. Eli looked at her but said nothing. He knew this decision had to be hers alone. The eldest war chief stepped forward. Lady Graina, the council has governed in your absence, but the people have never stopped believing you would return. They still call you the daughter of Iron Fang. Graina lowered her eyes. I left because I wanted peace, she replied. I was tired of being treated like a symbol instead of a person. And we understand that now, the chief said quietly. The mistakes of the past cannot be undone, but they can be corrected. Another war chief, younger and far less patient, folded his arms. What the council cannot understand, he said, is why our future leader would choose to live in poverty beside a human. Several bodyguards glanced uneasily at one another. The words hung heavily in the air. Before Graina could respond, Eli stepped forward. There is no need for an argument, he said calmly. If Graina belongs with her people, then she should go. Graina turned to him in surprise. You would send me away? Eli smiled gently. I would never keep someone from following their heart, or their responsibility. His words carried no bitterness. Only honesty. The younger chief studied Eli carefully. You realize what you're giving up? I never believed kindness should come with a reward, Eli answered. I helped Graina because she needed a friend, not because I expected anything in return. The older war chief nodded with quiet admiration. There are rulers with less honor than this man. Just then, Lila walked over and slipped her small hand into Graina's. Are you leaving forever? She asked softly. Graina knelt so they were eye to eye. I don't know. Lila looked down at the snow for a moment before speaking again. My mama used to tell me something. Graina smiled sadly. What was it? She said real family isn't just the people you're born with. It's the people who stay when life gets hard. Graina felt tears fill her eyes again. She hugged the little girl tightly. You've become family to me too. That evening, the war chiefs made camp outside the valley instead of forcing a decision. Fires burned across the snowy hillside while armored guards stood watch beneath the stars. Inside Eli's cabin, the atmosphere was quiet. The three of them shared a simple dinner of rabbit stew and warm bread, just as they had many times before. No one spoke much. Each of them understood that everything might change by morning. Later that night, Graina stepped outside and found Eli sitting beside the old oak tree, watching the moonlight reflect off the snow. I've been unfair to you, she said. Eli looked up. How? I let myself become part of your family without thinking about what would happen when my past caught up with me. You didn't plan this. No. She hesitated. If I return, everything becomes complicated. Eli gave a quiet laugh. Life has been complicated since the day we met. For the first time in weeks, Graina laughed with him. Then her smile faded. I'm afraid. Of ruling? She nodded. And of losing this. Eli stood and looked toward the warm light shining through the cabin window, where Lila was already asleep. If your people truly need you, don't refuse because you're afraid. He paused before adding gently. And don't stay because of me. Graina searched his face, realizing once again why she had come to trust him. He wasn't asking her to choose him. He was asking her to choose what was right. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight touched the valley. The war chiefs gathered once more before the cabin. Every eye turned toward Graina. It was finally time for her to decide not only the future of Clan Ironfang, but also the future of the family she had found where she least expected it. The first light of dawn spilled across the snow-covered valley as Graina stepped out of the cabin. The war chiefs stood waiting with their bodyguards, their horses saddled and ready for the long journey home. Eli stood quietly beside Lila, saying nothing. He had made peace with whatever choice Graina would make. The eldest war chief bowed respectfully. Lady Graina, he said. The clans await your decision. Graina took a deep breath and looked around the valley. She saw the little cabin that had sheltered her when she had nothing. She saw the garden Eli and Lila had planted together. She remembered the baskets of food left on her doorstep, the repaired roof, the evenings spent laughing around the fire, and the kindness that had asked for nothing in return. Then she faced the chiefs. "I will return to Iron Fawn." Several warriors smiled with relief. But, she continued firmly, "I will not return as the frightened woman who ran away." The chiefs listened in silence. "I left because I refused to let others decide my future. If I become your leader, it will be because I choose to serve my people, not because anyone owns my life." The eldest chief placed a hand over his heart. "You have our word." Graina turned toward Eli. "There is one more condition." The chiefs waited. "The Apache who protected me, and his daughter, are my family." The younger war chief frowned slightly. "You would bring humans into Iron Fawn?" "I would bring honorable people into Iron Fawn," Graina answered. "If our kingdom truly wishes for a better future, it must begin by judging people by their character instead of their race." The valley fell silent. At last, the eldest chief smiled. "Your father would have said the same." He stepped toward Eli. "Eli Blackhawk." Eli nodded respectfully. "You sheltered our future leader without asking who she was. You defended her when others threatened her. You treated her with dignity when the world had forgotten hers." The old chief removed a heavy silver pendant bearing the Iron Fawn crest and placed it in Eli's hands. "From this day forward, you are a friend of Iron Fawn. Any land under our banner will welcome you as an honored guest." Eli looked at the pendant, humbled. "I only did what anyone should do." The chief smiled. "Sadly, not everyone does." Lila tugged gently on Graina's sleeve. "So, does this mean you'll still be with us?" Graina knelt and wrapped the little girl in a warm embrace. "If you'll have me." Lila grinned. "I've wanted you to stay since the day you braided my hair." Everyone laughed, even the stern bodyguards. Months later, the great fortress of Iron Fawn buzzed with excitement. Orcs from every corner of the kingdom gathered beneath towering stone walls decorated with banners of silver and deep green. But this celebration was unlike any in their history. Humans stood beside orcs. Apache elders shared stories with clan chiefs. Children of both peoples played together in the castle courtyard, unaware that generations of distrust were quietly fading. At the center of it all stood Graina and Eli. Instead of a political marriage arranged for power, theirs was a union built on trust, friendship, and love. The eldest war chief addressed the crowd. "Today we celebrate more than the marriage of our leader." He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "We celebrate the courage to choose kindness over fear, compassion over pride, and unity over division." Cheers echoed through the fortress. As the sun set beyond the mountains, Graina looked at Eli, then at Lila, who was happily dancing with children from both clans. Years earlier, she had believed she had lost everything. Instead, by accepting the kindness of a widowed Apache father, she had found something greater than wealth or power. She had found a home. And from that day forward, the story of the Apache father who helped a poor orc woman without knowing she was destined to rule became a legend told in both human villages and orc strongholds, a reminder that true greatness is measured not by titles or armies, but by the simple choice to help someone in need.